This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by lynda.com, the unparalleled online video training library. For a free 10-day unlimited trial, visit lynda.com/MacVoices. And by Smile, the makers of PDF Pen, PDF Pen Pro, PDF Pen for iPad and iPhone, PDF Pen Scan Plus for iPad and iPhone, Text Expander Touch, and Disk Label. Find out more about all their great products at smilesoftware.com. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the Talk of the Mac community. I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, we have Mr. Joe Kissell back with us once again. This time, though, well, again, he's not a Take Control author this time. This time, he's a Joe on Tech author. His newest book for that series is Maintaining Your Mac, a Joe on Tech Guide. Joe, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Nice to be here, as always. I like to switch back and forth, one book one week, another book the next week, just mix it up.
Yeah, I think we should maybe put one hat on when you're doing one hat when you're doing the other.
I do still have my tinfoil hat right here.
if only if necessary. I'm really excited about this book. I'm always excited about your books, Joe, because they kind of boil things down and tell me what I need to know without a lot of superfluous information. But this one is something that I get an awful lot of. I get viewer comments or questions. I get listener comments, questions. I get a lot of questions in my user group about maintaining your Mac. What's necessary, what's not, how much of this really helps, does it make a difference, and all those things. So I'm trusting that this will answer all those questions and I can just hand them a copy.
Pretty much. I like science. I like science fiction too, but I like science. And in my books, I have one on, we'll talk in future months about troubleshooting and speeding up your Mac, but I have read so many websites for so many years that just love to say, oh, you're having a problem? Try this. And then some people say, well, I tried that and it didn't work. And other people will say, well, I had different results than you did. And there's a lot of stuff gets sort of circulated as like urban myths, like, well, back in the old Mac OS 9 days, you have to rebuild your desktop all the time. And then it was repairing permissions. And that's like this magic thing you have to do all the time or else your Mac won't work right. And these, a lot of things just sort of get stuck in people's minds because somebody claimed it really helped them. And then all of a sudden it achieves this sort of magical status. So like everybody has to defragment their hard drive every week. And, so I like to use the scientific method. Well, let's put this to the test. Let's do an experiment and see before and after and actually find out, like dig into it, find out what these different activities really do and are they worth it? And interestingly, as I applied that to this book, I realized that some of the advice that I gave previously was probably bad or not ideal, let's say. And as I investigated further and accumulated more data and actually got facts, and said, oh, well, now that I look at this in a new light, I think I need to give different advice now. So I'm not really interested in, we'll just try something and see if it works. I want to have more sort of fact-based, maintenance procedures. So that's what I'm trying to do in this book. I do dispel some myths. I have a whole chapter that's called what do I call it? Like tasks to skip, like things you may have heard about that you ought to do all the time that I'm saying, nah, probably not. Well, maybe there are a few exceptions here and there, but most people really don't need to do them. But other things I'm like, well, there are things that are good as troubleshooting tasks, but aren't necessarily useful as preventive maintenance and so on. So I do get into a lot of that stuff.
Right, so it's really tempting for me to go about a dozen different directions. But the first thing, is there anything in the dispelling of the myths or anything that you've heard about maintaining your Mac that can actually go the other way, that could be harmful if you do it?
I don't know. I don't know quite how to answer that. There's this saying: anything that a person ingests could be poison in the right quantity. So the difference between helpful and harmful is often just the dosage. Like enough water can kill you.
Sure.
So I think some of that applies to Mac maintenance as well. There are things that you can overdo. Well, okay, here is an example. There are lots of maintenance utilities out there, lots and lots of them, whose marketing is like, buy this utility and we're going to clear off all the crap on your Mac. We're going to get rid of all those extra files that you don't need, and that is going to speed up your Mac. It's going to give you all this extra performance. And there is a kernel of truth to that. There are situations in which having a disk that's too full can lead to lower performance. But there's a lot about that's just a myth too. And some of these utilities just want to delete all kinds of stuff, things that you might actually want, things that you need. And there's a temptation to just say, well, I'm just going to check everything because surely this utility knows what it's doing. The people who made it must have been smart. So I'm just going to have it go in and delete anything that it thinks needs to be deleted. And then you come back, it's like, oh, where are all my photos? Or, whatever. Something that if you pay attention to what it's suggesting that you delete and say, I think I'd like to hang on to that, then great. But if you just say, every morning I'm going to delete all of my caches and I'm going to delete all of my cookies and I'm going to, whatever, delete all these different things, that certainly can cause harm.
Okay, so I'm not hearing anything that I could do outside of maybe just not knowing what I'm doing. To use an example that's probably not a great one, if I repair permissions and repair permissions and repair permissions, I can't really do any harm there, can I?
I don't think you'll do any harm other than wasting your precious life.
Okay.
Life is short.
Life is short, but
I do
I'm not
talk about...
Yeah, I'm not going to damage the data or anything.
You're not going to damage your computer. I do talk about repairing permissions, and the thing about that is it is a useful troubleshooting step. It is something that you do when your Mac is experiencing certain kinds of problems. It's not a preventive step, though. If you aren't experiencing any problems now, repairing permissions won't prevent problems from happening in the future because that's just not the way permissions work. So it's not a useless activity. It is useful as a troubleshooting step in certain situations. It's just not worth doing every day just cause. By the way, you have probably heard that repairing permissions will not occur in El Capitan. So Apple has removed the repair permissions button from disk utility in El Capitan. And there are two reasons for this. The first reason is that Apple is locking down parts of the system that could otherwise have had their permissions altered by rogue installers. So it will, in some respects, be, if not impossible, very, very difficult for your permissions to go wrong. And when the Apple installer does run, whenever you install anything using the Apple installer, the installer itself is going to repair your permissions if they need repairing. So the repair permissions command will go away in El Capitan, and I couldn't be happier. Apple is basically defining the problem out of existence and saying there's just no need to do this anymore. The problem that it supposedly fixes can't exist, and let us handle it for you. So I'm really thrilled about that.
I had missed that. That is very interesting. That is very interesting. Okay, so I'm going to try to break this down maybe into two areas. The first are things that I can do to maintain my Mac that I don't need any third-party software. It's either on my Mac or it's a procedure or it's something that Apple gives me. Where do you advise us to go in that regard?
So there are quite a few things. The book is structured very much like its predecessor, which was called Take Control of Maintaining Your Mac, in that I start out with some things that you should just do now. You haven't done a spring cleaning in months or years. Let's get some clutter taken care of now. And then I have like a few things you should do every day, every week, every month, every year. So almost everything in the book can be done without any extra software. It's just that some of the things you might want to do would be more convenient if you had extra software. For example, I talk about some files you might want to delete that are sort of buried down in your system. There are some situations in which you might need to dig into Terminal to change a setting or delete something or make some other change. And there are utilities, some of them free, that will do that sort of stuff with a click. So it's not that you can't do them manually. Sure you can, and I tell you how whenever that's possible, but utilities also make them simpler. So some of the things that I recommend, unsurprisingly, echo some of my other books. Like, I do say you should set up backups if you don't have backups already, because that really is one of the best forms of preventive maintenance. If a problem occurs, having a backup will enable you to undo it. So that's great. I also talk about, changing weak passwords, which we've talked about a lot. That's another sort of maintenance thing. But I do talk about getting rid of files and login items and startup items and just stuff on your Mac that you don't need. It's more important to do this if you're running really, really low on disk space, as I say. But even if you have plenty of disk space, there are certain items that might cause software incompatibilities when you upgrade to the next version of OS X. Or they might use up RAM that you would rather be have used for other tasks that could slow down your Mac. So there are reasons to just examine certain categories of things and say, well, I'm not really using this. I downloaded this software that seemed really cool, and I haven't used it in months. It's still there. It's still running. Well, get rid of it then, because if you're not actively using it, if it's not making your life better, it's going to be at least a little bit of a drain on your Mac's performance, and why risk it? So I do talk about things that you can turn off, things that you can remove, setting up backups and using good passwords. One of the things I talk about a lot is software updates. So it pains me to see someone struggling with a bug, a problem with some app, whether it's OS X or a third-party app, that has been solved. The manufacturer fixed the problem, but the person was unaware that there was an update out there or hadn't bothered to install the latest updates, and so they're still struggling with it. Don't do that. Mac OS X has software update built into it. If for Apple apps and things you buy from the Mac App Store, that's all. There's a system preferences pane where you can set up updates to happen automatically, or at least download the stuff so that you are aware that they exist, and then you install them when you have time. You don't necessarily have to install everything the very instant if it's not convenient for you. And third-party apps too, even things that are outside the Mac store, staying on top of software updates requires no extra tools. They're already there on your Mac, but that can solve a lot of problems, bugs, performance issues, and that's something I really strongly recommend.
This edition of MacVoices is sponsored by lynda.com, the unparalleled online video training library. Get a full free 10-day trial at lynda.com/MacVoices. If you're a MacVoices listener or viewer, it's a pretty safe bet that we share some characteristics. You like to learn, to keep up with what's new and interesting in the tech field and beyond. That you are tech savvy to one degree or another. That you want to be more productive and probably need to be more productive, either for yourself or for your vocation. We all have our secret weapons to keep us afloat and ahead of the competition. I'm happy to say that lynda.com is a key piece of my arsenal. No one can learn everything about everything, no matter how hard we try, because tomorrow, next week, or next month, there's even more of everything. If I can learn something from an expert, why would I want to waste precious time trying to figure it out for myself? lynda.com has experts in a wide variety of subjects, tech and non-tech, who will help you learn what you need to learn fast and efficiently, and at your own pace. Say that you need to get up to speed on Google Apps for the office, or want to learn how to work with Camera Raw in Photoshop Creative Cloud, or are interested in learning about entrepreneurship from someone like the one and only Guy Kawasaki. Those are just a few of the recent courses that lynda.com has published. And I mean just a few, because there are all sorts of videos to help you learn about the general concepts of a topic or the down and dirty details. You can try all of this for a free full 10 days by signing up at lynda.com/MacVoices. During that 10 days, you can watch whatever you want, as much as you want, on any subject you want. No restrictions, no limitations. Try a design course, then a spreadsheet course, then a web publishing course. You pick the topics that suit you, not some limited subset of the collection of over 3,500 courses on lynda.com. Please, do something nice for yourself right now by signing up for 10 days free at lynda.com/MacVoices, then let me know what you decided to watch. Maybe we can trade recommendations. I'm on Twitter as @ChuckJoyner, and I want to hear from you. One last time, lynda.com/MacVoices for a free 10-day trial. Do it now, you won't regret it. Thanks to lynda.com for their support of MacVoices. You make me feel better because it sounds like there's nothing I'm missing. I love the idea of a spring cleaning, even though it's July.
Yes.
As we record this, August probably when it goes out. There's so much I just did that last week. I went through and realized that there were like 10 apps that I needed to get rid of that they just were taking up space. I hadn't used them. In some cases, I don't even remember what they did. And that's a pretty good indication that it's time to go.
Right on. And, you know, even testing your hardware. So OS 10 includes disk utility, which of course can check your disks and make certain kinds of repairs. And it also includes either Apple hardware test if your Mac is older, or Apple diagnostics if it's newer, which can check your logic board and your RAM and other hardware components. These things come with your Mac. They don't do all the things that a third-party product like Disk Warrior, TechTool Pro, or Drive Genius can do, but they come with your Mac and they're free and they can solve a lot of problems. So there are tools like that you can and should learn how to use, and that can certainly help prevent problems.
Joe, before we move on to some commercial tools, I want to go back for a second to those tools that you were talking about that will go through and clean your Mac for you and maybe delete things you don't want to. I've learned the hard way that, you know, I'm trusting my system. It's going to do something unusual to my system that I'm not going to be completely aware of. And so I want to know who the people are behind this, and I want to make sure they have good reputations, because like you say, there are a million of these utilities out there, probably all well-meaning, but not necessarily. Anybody you particularly trust, or anything that in that category of utility, or do you think you should just stay away from those completely?
Well, I talk about this in the book. Let's start with a product that I distrust, don't trust. That's Mackeeper. I'm going to go ahead and recommend staying away from Mackeeper. It's one of these all-purpose utilities that's supposed to clear out clutter and protect your Mac against viruses and do all kinds of other crazy stuff. And I really haven't read any positive stuff about it. I mean, some of the stuff that it does is legitimate, but the company has a kind of bad reputation for really aggressive advertising, one might say intrusive advertising, and the product itself seems to reach a little too far into your system. It seems to be hard to uninstall. It just gives me a really creepy vibe. And I've linked to a couple of articles where other people who have looked into it much more deeply say very much the same thing. I would go ahead and stay away from Mackeeper. One utility I use, and I've tried lots of these like uninstaller and cleaner utilities. One that I was honestly quite skeptical about at first, but came around to love, is called Clean My Mac. And I met some of the guys from MacPaw, the company that makes this. I believe it's a Ukrainian company, but I met them at a Mac World 2-3 years ago and had a nice long talk with them and had a lot of my questions answered. And the more I sort of dug into what are you really doing here and how much do you know and what are you doing to my Mac, I realized they really do know what they're talking about. Even so, I would not accept all the recommendations that Clean My Mac makes. I would uncheck certain things. I would be careful in certain places. But I've used it. I like it. I think it is one of the more trustworthy and more reputable cleaning type apps. And because I have actually interacted personally with people at the company, and I think they're solid, I can recommend that. There are many others, some free, some paid. I talk about Onyx, which does a lot of these sort of cleaning tasks, but also is a really great tool for changing some of those hidden preferences for OS X itself and for Finder and Mail and Safari that would otherwise require a trip to Terminal. So that's cool. And there are many other apps and other categories which we can get to. But if I had to pick one to stay away from, it would be Mackeeper. And if I had to pick one that I think, based on what I know about the company, I'm behind, that would be Clean My Mac.
Interestingly, I've had both companies on the show. The guys from Mackeeper, I think, at the front line are decent people. I think they believe in what they have. The thing I find most distressing about Mackeeper is that it seems, you're right, so difficult to uninstall, and that is not the hallmark of a good program. If I'm finished using it or I'm dissatisfied, I want to be able to get rid of it, and there should be no remnants. Yeah. And that does not seem to be the case as of this recording. So I'm with you. I've also met the guys from MacPaw, and I have a lot of respect for them. I've used MacPaw's products with success, so those are a couple case studies. Yeah, and that's really all you can do. You can't. I don't have the source code for these apps. I can't tell you exactly what they do or don't do. I can only say this is my experience. These are the experiences I have heard from other people, and I think you'll have a good experience too. But computers are complex, so buyer beware. Yes. So let's move on to some of the commercial things. And you just said an interesting phrase, that there are a lot of different categories of these. So do you break them down in the book, or how do you break down what maintenance means in the terms of this book?
So I'll give you an example of a category. That's monitoring utilities. So there are utilities that just make you aware constantly of situations that are going on with your Mac, like how much memory you're using, how much disk space is full, the temperature of various parts of the inside of your Mac, how much CPU power you're using, statistics like these. So I have one of these utilities running in my menu bar right now, so I can just see at a glance how much of my RAM is in use, how much of my CPU power is in use, how much network activity there is, and just at a glance I can see, ooh, wow, something is really chewing up my processor. I didn't think I was doing anything, significant here. Maybe I should look into what that was. Or, oh my goodness, the temperature on a certain component is really, going through the roof. I might have a bad fan. In fact, exactly that happened. I got reports that one of the one of the fans in my iMac, the fan that was next to the hard drive that keeps the hard drive cool, that temperature sensor was way out of whack, and it turns out that not only was the hard drive bad, but the fan that cooled the hard drive was also bad. So I had to replace both of those. And monitoring utilities can tell you about stuff like this before they get so bad that your Mac is out of commission. So there is a whole category of monitoring utilities that's very helpful for preventive maintenance, because it helps you identify problems, the smart status on your hard drive or SSD, stuff like that, before it gets severe. There are the cleaning apps, and a lot of these maintenance utilities have like a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. So it's hard to really cleanly separate them. There are obviously, in categories like backups and passwords, there are other apps we've talked about many times. There are apps that will look for duplicate files. One that I quite like is called Gemini. So if you want to save space on your hard disk, just finding duplicate files and deleting all but one of them could be useful. There are apps that can look for files that are just really large, and you may not realize, oh, well, I have a 30 gigabyte file here that I didn't remember that I had. It was a virtual machine or was something or other, and I can delete that. Just help you identify files by size, or maybe a combination of it's old and it's large. You can get other disk repair utilities, like we talked about, TechTool Pro, Disk Warrior, those sorts of things, in case you need them. There are also, this is not exactly a third-party utility, but that is something I actually learned about while writing this book. If you have a UPS, an uninterruptible power supply, which is a great idea. There's one, you can't see it, but there's one sitting on that shelf right back there. This, in the case of a power outage, this will keep your Mac running for a little bit. And one of the things that some UPSs can do is to tell your Mac, hey, you know what? The power just went out, and I'm running on batteries right now. So why don't you go ahead and shut down gracefully instead of just going poof? So if you have one of these UPSs and you connect it to your Mac with a USB cable, a new pane shows up in, our new tab shows up in the Energy Saver pane of System Preferences, a UPS tab that lets you configure, oh, I just got a thing from my UPS telling me I better shut down gracefully now, and so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I didn't even know that existed because that's not the configuration I have here, but it exists. So even if the UPS manufacturer doesn't include software of their own to do this sort of thing, if they support the sort of industry standard way of doing this, your Mac itself can do that with an extra pane in System Preferences. So there are many categories of software that I talk about. Those are some of the highlights.
Okay. Joe, I guess when we're talking about maintaining, we're talking about things to do before something goes wrong.
Preferably, yes.
So do we address, pardon me, do we address anything here that should be worked on after something does go wrong, if something starts to appear wrong with your Mac? Or is this book targeted strictly at just getting things done before it goes wrong?
Some of the things I talk about, like using disk repair and disk utility, can fix problems in addition to preventing them. But most of the things I talk about in this book are strictly preventive. Now, the next book, the next Joe on Tech Guide that we talk about, will be all about troubleshooting. So this is whether or not you've done the preventive steps, something has gone wrong, because of course something can go wrong even if you do the preventive steps. And that book is the okay, now what? And that's a much more, it's a longer book, it's more involved, but also essential because things do go wrong. This book is mostly about keeping you out of trouble. It's the same idea as you get a new car and it works great, and then you drive it for 5 years without ever changing the oil. It's not going to keep running great because cars are machines, and you just can't do that to a machine. You have to maintain them. And your Mac is a machine. It doesn't need an oil change, but it needs some sort. It does certainly need to get the dust removed from it. Oh, dust! Dust is your Mac's enemy. I have taken apart a lot of Macs, and I've seen some really cruddy interiors. And you get canned air, a vacuum, whatever. You get the dust out of there, and you put it back together, and you're like, it's so quiet now, and it's so cool, and everything runs faster. Just dust, So. Dust is another thing I talk about in this book. It's in that category of, if you have a little bit of dust, you get rid of it, that can prevent problems. If you are experiencing problems that are caused by dust, removing the dust can also solve those problems. So it's sort of both of those things, but it's something a lot of people never think about. They just think, well, it's a box and it's on my desk and I will never open it. And if dust gets in the little vents, whatever, I'm sure it's made to handle that, but dust is actually, dust isn't the problem, heat is the problem. And when dust keeps the air from circulating, that heat can really, really do some damage.
Today's edition of MacVoices is sponsored by Smile, the makers of world-class software. I love Text Expander from Smile. Why? Because it has 3 characteristics of great software. It lets me do more, do it faster, and helps prevent errors I might otherwise make. Text Expander lets you create short, simple pieces of text, or snippets in Text Expander speak, that trigger the insertion of larger chunks of text into pretty much any document or piece of software. Those snippets might be something as simple as today's date, or as large as a multi-page piece of boilerplate to go in a contract, or something as complex as a chunk of HTML code for your website. So for me, by typing MVSIG, I get my full email signature, complete with links, inserted into an email, or MVST, and I get the pieces of information you see at the bottom of each MacVoices show page. So how it makes things easier and faster is sort of obvious. I can do more because I have less to do. But how does it help me from making mistakes? 2 ways. First, if I were having to type in all that code every time, there's a fair chance I might leave out this bracket or that, and then things don't work. And then I have to go back and try to find out what's missing and fix it. That wastes time. By using my snippet, it's right the first time, every time. The second way is by loading in the Tidbits Autocorrect Dictionary, a collection of commonly mistyped or miscapitalized words created by the Tidbits crew. Since Text Expander is constantly monitoring your typing for snippet use, it's also checking against that library and sees when you make a mistake. Poof, it fixes it, almost too fast for you to see. And if that's not enough, if you know of a common mistake that you make regularly, you can set up your own snippet to fix it, in about as much time as it would take you to fix one error in the first place. After that, your error gets fixed the same way, fast, simple, so you can keep on moving to get more done. Did I mention that you can sync your snippets across all your Macs running Dropbox? So that the snippet you create today at the office will be waiting for you to use on your home Mac tonight. And with Text Expander Touch 3 for iOS 8, you can even use your Text Expander snippets on your iPhone or iPad. You can get a free demo version of Text Expander right now at smilesoftware.com. About 10 seconds after installing your first snippet, you're going to understand how this works, how powerful it is, and what it can do for you. And if you really want to tap into the full power and more sophisticated features of Text Expander, check out Take Control of Text Expander by Michael E. Cohen. Smile and Tidbits work together on this terrific Take Control book to make sure you can get the most out of my favorite productivity utility. That's Text Expander from Smile at smilesoftware.com. Get it and find out just how much you can get done. Smile, the makers of world-class software. Thanks to Smile for being the longest-running sponsor of MacVoices. How do you feel about some of the free utilities out there? Onyx, I believe, is one you mentioned. I think I can't remember if Cocktail was a pay-for now or not, but there are a number of those out there that purport to run the normal OS X maintenance scripts at different times. I think I've struck some.
Yes, no, I'm glad you asked.
Okay.
So right before the show, I was looking over my list of what all I changed in this book, and there's a significant list of what advice is different from what I gave before. And these periodic maintenance tasks are one of the things that I moved. I forget how often I said to do them previously, but now I'm saying, now I moved it from, it was like a monthly task or I don't know what, but now I've moved it to the list of tasks that you might never need to do. So let me explain. There are, built into OS X are some little scripts that do stuff like compressing and or deleting old log files. Because like lots of apps just create logs as they run, and that's useful for like diagnostic purposes, but they're just taking up space, so delete the old ones. And there are lots of like stuff that gets just cleaned up or removed. One of the other things that these periodic tasks used to do, so there was like a daily, weekly, monthly script, and the idea was if your Mac is on, then sometime in the middle of the night these scripts run, and they do their little cleanup stuff, and then they quit, and you never know the difference. But if your Mac doesn't happen to be on when they run, What's supposed to happen is when you turn it back on, then they run, but that doesn't always happen due to reasons. So there are all these utilities that say, okay, let's force all these maintenance scripts to run like right now. One of the, so I actually looked into, like, I opened up the scripts because you can do that. You can see, what do they do? And I looked at, oh, well, wow, this one script like deletes cached outgoing faxes that I'm sending, because it's possible, if you have the right kind of ancient modem connected to your Mac, to use your Mac to send faxes. But like, who does that anymore? Come on. So so I don't really need my fax caches deleted, and like a bunch of other stuff. So the one thing though that one of these tasks did do that I really appreciated, on the command line in terminal, there's a command called locate, and it's a really great way to find any file by file name or a portion of the file name. This is what I use in the terminal. When I'm in the terminal rather than Spotlight, it can find some things that Spotlight has trouble with, and I just really like the locate command. And so one of these periodic tasks would update the database that locate uses of where all the files are, and it would do this, I don't know, once a day or once a week. It turns out that 1 or 2 OSs ago, I forget whether it was in Mavericks or I forget exactly. It's in the book someplace. But Apple decided, you know what? This is something that really needs to happen, even if those maintenance scripts don't run. So they pulled it out of the script and they gave it its own task. So the locate database is going to update itself on its own without these maintenance scripts running. So when I looked at what was left, what they actually do now, remember, science, they did like nothing that I care about, nothing that's interesting. They could literally not run for 10 years and I would never notice the difference. Everything would be totally fine. So I say, look, here's what they do. You probably don't need to run them. If your Mac is on overnight, they're going to run anyway. And if it's not, So, so that's my official feeling about the built-in maintenance scripts.
And would that carries over to the utilities that force them to run? Can't do any harm, but
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to hurt anything, but they're not going to do anything. They're not going to make your Mac run faster. It's not going to prevent problems. If you actually open up the scripts and see what they do, you're like, really? It just like compresses some old log files, and the uncompressed file was 10K. So what do I care? Like, it's not like these are huge, multi-gigabyte files that they were compressing or deleting. They're just tiny things. So it's not worth worrying about.
2 more things and I'll let you go. First one, just to be clear, this book is based on Mavericks right now as it stands. So some of the stuff doesn't necessarily apply going backwards, and it may not apply going forwards, depending on how we do.
Right. So this book is for Yosemite and Mavericks, and I know some things about El Capitan, and so I mentioned the things that I know. I just learned the other day that one of my favorite utilities, monitoring utilities, which I mentioned in the book, which is called MenuMeters. It's one of these things that lets you know what all the activity that your Mac is doing right now. The developer put a note on his website saying he's not sure he's going to be able to get it to run in El Capitan due to changes with developer restrictions and the way the system works. It didn't sound definitive to me. It sounded like we'll keep trying and keep looking into it. I don't know. It could turn out that some of my favorite utilities just won't run in El Capitan, and that's, occupational hazard. But other than that, as far as I know, everything in the book is still applicable. It's applicable into the future, and most of it is applicable into the past too. But back to the software updates, I say Yosemite, today's OS, Yosemite can run on all the same machines that supported Mavericks, and Mavericks can run on all the same machines that supported Mountain Lion, and El Capitan is the same way. So, and they're free. If you're running Snow Leopard or Mountain Lion, you can upgrade to Yosemite for free. You'll be able to upgrade to El Capitan for free. And these newer OSs have not just new features, but they have so many bug fixes and so many security improvements. I'd be hard-pressed to come up with a persuasive reason to stay on, Mountain Lion when there are much newer and much better OSs out there. And I'm hoping that El Capitan will be even better. I'm hoping that El Capitan will be to Yosemite as Snow Leopard was to Leopard. That is, mainly focus on bug fixes and in performance improvements, and that will be an even better argument. But part of the reason that I don't bother talking about Mountain Lion and the previous generation is that you can upgrade for free, and you really should.
Last thing, we have more and more SSD equipped Macs. We have the combination drives, the hyperdrives on the iMacs. Any particular special maintenance or special care we should take with those as opposed to the traditional spinning drive Mac?
I'm glad you mentioned SSDs, because one of the things I talk about in the you probably don't need to worry about this except maybe in a few isolated cases is defragmenting your disk. There are situations, and we've talked about this before, where if you're doing something like audio and video that has that's really moving a lot of data onto and off of your drive, and especially if your drive is getting very close to full, defragmenting it can really make some performance improvements. But for all the rest of us, for normal people, sorry, I'm not saying you're abnormal, but
Thank you.
You're special.
I feel so special.
For the rest of us, OS 10 does some defragmenting on its own, and the rest, it's very time consuming. It's usually not worth the effort for the tiny improvements it would make. But it could actually actively harm an SSD. There are situations in which a defragmenting neither helps nor harms a hard drive, but for an SSD, because they not only don't require defragmentation, but defragmenting can reduce the lifespan of your SSD just because of the way they hold data, and each chunk of data can only be written and read so many times, and stressing it by defragmenting it, which really means nothing in an SSD, could actually cause harm. So I do mention SSDs where it's relevant, and that's one of the places it's relevant. Most of the maintenance tasks are exactly the same regardless of whether you have a spinning hard drive or an SSD. You're still going to run into trouble with either one if you get critically low on space. Obviously, SSDs will mask that problem a little bit because they're inherently faster, but other than just making sure you don't defragment it, there's not a whole lot of advice that's different between the two.
Great. So we send folks to joeontech.net.
Yes.
joeontech.net. Yeah, I almost said it wrong. joeontech.net, where you can find Maintaining Your Mac, a Joe on Tech guide, along with the very first Joe on Tech guide, which was
Backing Up Your Mac. So we're working on a series here, folks. We have Backing Up Your Mac and Maintaining Your Mac, and if all goes well, later on this year, we will see Troubleshooting Your Mac and Speeding Up Your Mac. So all four of those titles are ones that are being moved over from Take Control into my stewardship, because I'm crazy. But so that's happening. Obviously, Take Control books are continuing as well. There will be more Joe on Tech guides after we finish with this sort of Mac fitness series, but we have to get through these first. So plenty more ahead.
Got it. And if I remember correctly, it's $15 for the ebook.
This one is $10. In fact, let's say $9.99 for the ebook and $14.99 for the paperback. So same price as the previous as Backing Up Your Mac. So I like to keep things simple. $9.99 ebook, $14.99 for paperback, and I hope you enjoy it.
Great. Joe, thank you. And I seem to say this a lot, but thank you for all the work you do to put these guides together, whether they're Tech Control or Joe on Tech. They're sort of my Bibles to go to when I need to know something or need to get something done quick. I don't even go to the vendor's website anymore. I just go right to these because you do such a thorough job, and you're doing a great job of keeping it up to date. So thank you.
Thank you.
We will be back again soon with you.
Awesome.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Look for more Take Control books, Joe on Tech books, and all kind of things from all of our friends at Take Control and Mr. Joe Kissell. Thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, Google+, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and the MacVoices blog. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date on all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Do more with your Apple tech by subscribing to the free MacVoices magazine on Flipboard by visiting MacVoices.com/magazine. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.